A Concordia, Bawailam righteous, a Yanu Fuin, a Kid, came on a Ala Major, Massanurira, Re Vervon, Hiha, and Bunscolana. Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a statement on the next steps for the computer-based assessments in primary schools. I would like to start by setting out the context in the computer-based assessments were conducted last autumn, but I do so in the knowledge that the experience of many children and their teachers was unquestionably negative. I do not underestimate the impact of this, and I am determined that lessons will be learned and that we do not have a rerun of this unacceptable experience. The benefits of pupil assessment for diagnostic purposes are almost universally accepted by our schools, and there are tremendous examples of good practice to be found throughout the North. Teachers want to know what their pupils can and cannot do in order to inform their teaching over the coming period. The statutory computer-based assessments were and are intended to deliver diagnostic assessments tailored to our own curriculum to support our teachers and pupils. International evidence from Timms and Pearls, for example, demonstrates how well our primary schools are performing when compared to those in other jurisdictions. This provides the rationale for developing an assessment tailored to our own needs. CBAs are not intended to be high-stake tests. They are assessment tools provided to inform teaching and learning. For this reason, data from the CBA is not collected or collated centrally. CBA is intended to support assessments for learning rather than of learning. Assessment outcomes should provide teachers and parents with information on pupils' strengths and areas for improvement. Computer-based assessments provide greater flexibility than paper-based methods and have the potential to minimise the impact on teacher workloads. Common assessment also offers primary schools a consistent basis for assessment tied into our own curriculum and information on outcomes. A common tool used by all schools allows outcomes to be standardised against the population here, to give parents and teachers a view of how individual children are doing compared to others in the same education system. An adaptive computer-based assessment adjusts the sequences or difficulty of questions in line with a pupil's ability, making it easier for children to perform at their best. And finally, since it is centrally procured, unlike commercially available assessments, computer-based assessments is free at the point of delivery. The introduction of the new computer-based assessments in autumn 2012 presented significant challenges. These challenges were faced by schools, and a significant number of them reported difficulties in the operations of the new assessment. If the Department makes it a legal requirement for schools to use an assessment, then this places a requirement on my department to ensure that it works. Clearly, this was not always the case last year. A policy that was intended to help and support teachers had in many cases the opposite effect. I also recognise that changes enforced by procurement rules have created their own difficulties. With the 5-year contract for INCAS coming to an end, these rules required a competitive tendering process to be launched. Many school principals have told me that just as they were getting used to the previous INCAS assessment, the package was withdrawn. This created difficulties for schools that benefit from continuity. Of most concern were the experiences relayed to me directly by teachers about the pressures they felt in administering the assessments, and in some cases the distress felt by pupils when they faced technical difficulties. This is clearly not good enough, which is why I instigated reviews of the implementation and operations of NINA and NELA, the numeracy and literacy assessments packages. What didn't work? In short, a range of things. Alongside a specific set of technical difficulties, user experience was often reported as poor, and there were real issues for teachers in terms of the ease of setup and compatibility with hardware. The reports which I commissioned have identified several things that could have been done better. Firstly, a review by SEA on the operation of the new assessment reported widespread dissatisfaction, with many questioning the link between the assessment outcomes and their own professional judgment. Secondly, an ETI review which looked at how effectively schools make use of this assessment information broadly echoes these findings. And thirdly, an independent gateway review identified a number of factors which contributed to last year's difficulties. The impact on the procurement process, poor communications amongst the delivery partners, the restricted timescale for adequate testing, The lack of appropriate authority and technical expertise within the project team taking forward the implementation, the absence of end-to-end load testing across the C2K network, difficulties with hardware, software setup within schools. The Gateway Review made 10 recommendations which my department have accepted. However, I also felt it was important to widen the scope of the reviews to look beyond last year's difficulties and to ensure that the CBA legislation and policy continue to support good practice in schools and my wider policy agenda. Since the making of the 2007 regulations, which made the use of computer-based assessment a statutory requirement, the policy agenda of my department has moved forward considerably. Statutory CBA must now be seen in the context of a range of policies. We have Count, Read, Succeed, which is central to the development of literacy and numeracy throughout the post-primary learning. Tagak Skull Ina Skull Vai Agin, Rud Anihan Rol Tawatak na Muncheri, Ashakadu, Herhi Ijahis, Ard Haidon, Gogak Ella Yaldi. We have every school a good school which recognises the essential role played by our teachers in delivering high-quality educational outcomes for all our pupils. Of particular importance, we have increased our focus on the needs, aptitudes and aspirations of all our children through the SEN review and the review of the Irish medium education, for examples. A common theme across my policy agenda is the importance of using assessment data and helping to improve outcomes for young people, and particularly in closing the gap between highest and lowest achievers. This includes promoting and strengthening parental involvement in their children's education. Effective use by schools of CBA data is intended to support this wider strategy. I therefore commissioned a fourth review of CBA policy by department to determine whether the policy continues to support my department's wider objectives. This policy review of statutory CBA held 10 workshops, with every primary school invited to participate. This consultation has found, almost without exception, that school principals accept and support the need for diagnostic assessment, but wish to see it supported in a more flexible way than the current CBA legislation allows. While the engagement with school leaders on medium and long-term options for the way forward has been extremely constructive, I am informed that a key message at each of the workshops has been the need for communication from the DE on what is happening in the coming term to allow schools to plan and prepare. The way forward. To address this concern, I am announcing the arrangements for computer-based assessment in 2013 earlier than originally indicated. On the basis of the findings from the reviews I have detailed, and most importantly, in recognition of the concerns expressed by schools, I have decided the Department will not specify the literacy and numeracy assessment NINA and NELA for mandatory use in the forthcoming term. There will be no legislative requirement on schools to assess pupils for diagnostic purposes using CBA or any other assessments, or to update parents with diagnostic assessments results in the autumn term. Sorry, let me just correct that. There will be no legislative requirement on schools to assess pupils for diagnostic purposes using CBA or any other assessments, or to update parents with a diagnostic assessment results in the autumn term. However, I know that schools value diagnostic assessment early in the year and plan to conduct assessments voluntarily using a range of tools. Consequently, I expect diagnostic assessment will take place in a form that is convenient for schools, and this information will feed into engagement with parents. The NINA and NELA assessments remain unique. They are designed to reflect our curriculum and are standardised against our pupils. I accept that there were major issues last year, and I have said many times how unacceptable this was. But it would be a real shame and a missed opportunity if these bad experiences lead us to lose this potential. I believe there is continued benefit for schools in using bespoke assessments, and for this reason, NELA and NINA will be available in schools on a voluntary basis. As we planned from the outset, NINA and NELA will continue to evolve. I am informed by SEA that it has listened to schools' concerns on the operation and outcomes of these assessments, and the significant improvements have been made, for example, to their usability and reporting. One of the first things I will be seeking later in the year is feedback from schools on the extent to which SEA has listened and the real improvements have been delivered. The voluntary use of these assessments on a pilot basis will generate lessons for future policy and practice. My department will be contacting primary schools over the next few days with more details on how this pilot will operate, and seeking nominees for participation. Concordia, while I am not specifying an assessment for use in 2013, the CBA legislation will remain in place until we repeal it or we amend it. In moving forward, I am determined to recognise and learn from the mistakes of the past and not to replicate them. For example, I recognise the importance of sound public procurement requirements, but these should not be allowed to override sound educational policy and practice in our schools. Even more importantly, rather than developing an assessment policy for schools, I am committed that my department works with them. The Independent Gateway Review had a specific task, and they did an excellent job within the time and resources they had available to them. In making arrangements for next year's pilot, I have tasked my officials to take forward each of the recommendations in the final report. However, I believe that a more detailed analysis of the 2 to 3 year period of CBA development and implementation is needed. It is clear to me that there are lessons to be learned from policy development through to implementations. Members may also wish to note that my department has provided key documentation to the Audit Office for their information. Marfocal score. In conclusion, I will make a more detailed announcement on the way forward on the further review on CBA policy later this year, and of course changes to the legislation, if any, will be subject to public consultation. Vein Sasta os dútu, Hort don Channel, Inyi and Frosses Shaw. I would be happy to update the Assembly following this process. Thank you.